Hello and welcome to my new podcast. This is going to be a show where I talk about pets and animals and some of the fun stories that I've heard. And I wanted to start off with a story of my dog, Cerberus, who was a German Shepherd who unfortunately passed away recently this year, which was honestly the inspiration for me wanting to do this. Cerberus was a fantastic animal, a fantastic pet that I really, really miss. And I honestly just wanted to take a moment to talk about him, share some of my favorite memories with him, and I don't know, maybe even open up this space as a place to share stories, fun stories of animals that we love, whether they're alive or not. Because I think it's helpful. I think it's necessary. And I don't know, I wanted to do this as my way of sending him off, but also to just share a little bit about who he was as an animal and why I loved him so much. So I wrote down some notes here that I'm just going to read off and maybe even improvise a little bit. This is not planned at all. If I continue doing this, I might maybe settle into a format, but for now, just bear with me. I just want to just take a couple minutes just to let you know about Cerberus. Syrup was his nickname for short, and why I loved him so much and why he is incredibly missed, and maybe even, I don't know, maybe spark some interest in you adopting a dog, or maybe even reminding you to give your dog a hug or something like that. So here goes. First and foremost, Cerberus, a German Shepherd who we took care of since he was a puppy. He was a huge scamp, and we loved calling him a scamp because he was very, very bratty, but very scampy in that nature. I don't even know how else to describe it. If you've ever owned a German Shepherd, or maybe you've been around some of them, they are known for being very smart and very clever, and it's 100% true. I think anyone who's owned a German Shepherd before will tell you that they sort of know. They're very much aware of a lot of different things, and they do come off as very smart dogs. And Cerberus was definitely no exception. He loved to walk the fine lines of rules and find little secret ways to break them. Now, a little bit of context here. Cerberus did suffer from anxiety. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but obviously animals can suffer from anxiety and things of that nature. I don't know too much about it, but I do know that animals can suffer from anxiety, and Syrup definitely had it. And it got to the point where we had to have him professionally trained. And in that process, we learned a lot about how anxiety comes to be. And essentially, long story short, sometimes with animals, they can get afraid, whether it is because something bad happened to them, or maybe they just didn't have the best upbringing. With us, with Syrup, we didn't have him early on. We got him a little bit later when we adopted him, and he didn't have the best upbringing to our best knowledge. So sometimes what that does is it triggers anxiety into animals, and it can be very hard to shake off. Even for humans, it's hard to deal with. I'm not so sure if dogs or animals can ever get rid of it, but once they have it, they sort of go into this indefinite defensive mode. They revert back into their instincts because they're afraid. So they're constantly on the lookout. And it's why dogs with anxiety are very commonly known to be aggressive, not because they're necessarily evil or want to hurt anything. It's because they're very scared. And so they have to revert back to that instinct. Syrup was anxious, but he was also a very sweet dog. And because of that, he had to live a very rigorous, structured life because otherwise he would just freak out. So we needed to learn how to provide a structured environment for him, how to make sure that we were its leaders, basically his leaders. He needed to ensure that while he was afraid, he knew that we would take care of him, and it actually helped to calm him down a little bit. So through all that, he had tons of rules to follow, and he was a scamp through and through. To the end of it all, he loved walking the fine line of those rules and finding little ways to break them. For example, wasn't allowed in the kitchen. He just needed to follow these rules. And I'm going to take another little sidestep here for those of you who might even be a little curious. When you're dealing with anxious dogs and you have a structured schedule, you learn this early on. It's important to maintain that schedule because they're animals. They're not humans. They don't think like you do. So they're not going to process the concept of following these rules and the consequences of what it's going to do down the line. Once they break the rules, they'll start to break those rules continuously. And so with anxious dogs particularly, it's incredibly important to establish the schedule and stick to that schedule so that they can remain calm and have a peaceful life. And that's what we did with Syrup. To the best of our abilities, we kept that structured, that structure, those rules. We ensured that he understood what was allowed and what wasn't. But even with that in mind, he always just somehow found a way to inch himself a little bit closer to those rules, to the point where it would be gray areas, right? For example, like our kitchen, there's a very fine distinction of when our kitchen starts and when it's the rest of the apartment. And he would find a way. He would lay right on the edge, right where the kitchen would start. He eventually learned to just lay there, and his paws, his really beautiful big paws, would just lay right before the kitchen floor started. And we would look at him, and sometimes, instinctually you would just say, hey, no, like we're cooking here. You need to respect the boundaries. But then you look at his body and his paws and you say to yourself, he's technically not breaking the rules. I mean, he's like right there. He shouldn't be right there. So then you'd move him back a little bit. But then in another couple of days, he would just inch his way. He would just, he knew these boundaries, and he would do that with so many different things. He would just get to that gray area, to the point where you would ask yourself, like, is that technically breaking the rules, that little scamp? And it's why we loved calling him a scamp, because he loved to test those boundaries. It's the mind of a German Shepherd, the mind of a very smart dog that knows it has rules to follow, but it's going to definitely test them. And I loved that he did that. He was a talker. Again, I'm not sure if you've ever owned a German Shepherd, but those kind of dogs are very vocal. They will let you know what they're feeling. They're so incredibly emotional too. Whenever they're annoyed, whenever they sense something. Yes, barking is common amongst dogs, obviously, but there are certain shepherds, for whatever reason, have this ability of having little emotions in their bark. And again, I'm not a dog expert. I'm sure there's plenty of breeds that do that. But Cerberus was, he was my dog. So I was able to observe that from him. And I was able to sort of compare from our neighborhood and our neighbors. Other dogs don't do that, but he was a huge yapper and a huge, we like to call it talking, because it felt like he would talk to us. He would just sit there. And whenever he was annoyed, he would do this. Like whenever we would tell him, hey, don't do that, he would just kind of look at us and go, and then just look the other way and then just go, rrr, rrr. Dorky. I know it makes you sound dorky, but it was just the cutest thing, because we always understood more or less what he was trying to tell us. And I'm sure as dog owners, we learn these little mannerisms of our pets. And Syrup he blessed us with this weird talking version of barking and yapping. And it was so cute. Another thing I wrote down were the games that we would play together. He was incredibly smart, and he got bored really, really easily. He loved chasing squirrels. He loved chasing balls. He loved, tugging on ropes, all of that. But he would lose interest in a lot of these, I guess you would call them just conventional ways of playing with your dog. He would get over them pretty quickly, within 5 minutes or so. But he was still energetic. He was still needed to play. And it was never a hassle for us, but it definitely encouraged us to think outside the box, literally, which I'll get into in a second, and just come up with creative ways to keep him engaged. So one of the things we started doing, I ship things on the side. I sell some things online. And so I have plenty of shipping material. And one day I just got the idea to, hey, let me tape up a box. Let me stick his ball in here. Let me see what happens. And just giving him that box and giving him permission to destroy something. And let me tell you, that just completely took off on its own. It really opened up this world of creative gameplay with our dog in ways that we never could have imagined. And it all started with that packaging box. It was the cutest thing to toy with him a bit, show him his little ball, toss it in that box, and then tape it up. And he knew it was in there. He could smell it. He could see it. And the minute it would be in that box, we would just set it down, and his little annoyed / curious sound would just come out like, rrr, rrr. And then he would get aggressive, kind of jab at the box and then just go to town, just like grab it and try to find different ways to open it. And he loved it. And it became our pattern every day. I had to buy a whole bunch of boxes. I had a stack of boxes here for a long time, specifically for him, where I think he would go through like 5 or 10 a day, where I would just multiple times through the day toss a toy, tape it up, toss it, or maybe even hide the box somewhere, and he would find it and just go to town and destroy it. Very, very fun way to play with him. And he loved finding things too. He would love hide and seek. And we would have to get so incredibly creative because his nose was so good. He would find the toy within a matter of seconds, no matter where we would put it. So we had to start putting it up in places, and it would be so cute. He knew exactly where it was at, especially if it was on a shelf or something like that. And he would just stare at it. He would just sit there and just look at it, do his little annoyed noise, and just look up, and then look at us, look up, and just start yapping, just aggressive, like letting us know, I know it's up there. I need you to bring it down. So many of those creative games that we have to play just to hide them. And it was such a blast just to watch him be active with his brain too, not just running around, but just be active and being able to find things. It was just so magical. And I don't know, I wanted to pivot a little bit from here because I wanted to talk about some of the more emotional side of Syrup, because yes, while he did suffer from anxiety and he had a structured regimen and all that, and yes, he did have some aggressive behavior, he was a good dog overall. He was a very good dog that I felt incredibly connected to, and one that I always felt was trying to communicate. You know, I'm sure as owners, we know that our dogs and our pets are trying to communicate with us. But there's moments that I experienced with Syrup where it really just taught me to be a little more open-minded about the world that I live in, and to recognize that I don't necessarily know everything that's going on all the time. My partner had another dog named Cheyenne, who was a Mastiff Pit Bull mix. Beautiful, gorgeous dog. And that dog was older. She had had that dog since she was a little girl. And so by the time Syrup came in, we called her Mama as a nickname, but her name was Cheyenne. And she was already older by the time Syrup as a puppy came into their lives. And Syrup very quickly took to her and treated her as his mommy, even though she wasn't. Mama, Cheyenne, she was very much the protector of that family. She very much was the queen of that house. That dog was regal. She was wise. She was just a bundle of love, but she was just, there was something about her. She was a very wise dog. And it was the cutest thing to watch this little yappy, scamp, bratty German Shepherd puppy come into their lives, start hopping around everywhere, start trying to destroy everything, and then walking up to her and treating her like it's mom. And you could see her behavior change, dramatically. It was like an annoyance. It was like she understood, like, hey, what is this other dog doing in our house? But there was this wise acceptance of her, of taking in this creature she didn't know and taking care of it. But she was clearly annoyed. You could tell throughout their whole experience, she was incredibly annoyed. But she loved him and she took care of him. And as they got older, they definitely did get on each other's nerves. You can sense it because these are two big dogs who are both smart and both, I don't know if you want to call them alphas, but they're definitely, they're at the top of their food chain. And they would never really get into arguments, but you could just tell they would annoy each other. But it kind of became this like buddy cop relationship, I guess you can call it, where one was the goofball and the other one was the more quiet, serious one, right? Anyways, fast forward a couple years later, and Cheyenne got older and she got cancer, and eventually she moved on from this life, sadly, passed away. And around that time, Syrup was not living with us particularly. He was living with Marissa's aunt. But something changed that day. It was interesting when we went down to visit, and we went to the vet and all that. And it was a very tough moment, but we all knew it was coming. We had prepared for it. But when we went to her aunt's house, that morning Cheyenne was there. And then by that afternoon, Cheyenne was no longer with us. And Cerberus knew. He somehow knew. His personality, his feeling, everything about him changed that day. There was something different. And I don't know if you would call it sadness. I don't know what it really was, but you could feel it. He was looking for her, but not in this way of like, where is she? Where is she? It was very like he understood. He was slower that day, very melancholic. He sat with me. I was feeling very sad that Cheyenne was gone. And he just came up to me in a way that he had never come up before. And I had already known him for years at this point, but he had come up to me and just sat there with me and laid on my lap. And he laid on my lap for like an hour and a half at least, because we really stayed at our aunt's house that day, like, you know, very much remembering and doing that sort of thing. And Syrup did not budge. He was an active dog. He really was fidgety. He loved to do things. He would be smelling. He hated sitting in one place for more than a couple minutes at a time. And I know I could pet him. He definitely let me pet him and love on him. But even with me, he had his limit. He had to go and do stuff. But for whatever reason, that day, it really stuck with me. Came up to me, laid on my lap for a very long time and just laid there. No complaint, no talking noises, none of that. It was just somber. And, you know, I want to say a couple of days later, he more or less went back to normal, but not in the same way. He changed. He missed her, I want to say. And that whole experience really taught me how little I knew, right? Like, I think many of us, we talk about this stuff and we think about it and we remember when we lost pets and whatnot. But there is this sort of layer of understanding that maybe animals do know, maybe they don't know, maybe they know some things. They're aware of, dogs are aware of smells that we're not. We never, at least I never really stopped to think about it. But that moment really made things clear for me that he understood something was going on. He knew she wasn't there anymore, and he somehow accepted it and was there to comfort me. It was beautiful. And that's part of who he was. And because he suffered from anxiety, especially as years went past and he eventually came to live with us, me and Marissa, and spent the last couple years of his life with us, we really learned to take care of him and be on the lookout for his best behavior no matter what. So it made it difficult for us to really travel or do a lot of cool things. I don't want to say cool things because it was a joy being with him, but it was definitely more of like we had to plan ahead to make sure that he was taken care of if we ever left town. And there was one trip that I researched a lot to make sure we could do it, but we went to a farm and we were able to take him with us. That farm was very dog friendly, and I let the owner know that he had anxiety and that, you know, don't worry, we've got our eye on him. We have our tools, everything that we need to keep him at bay. And it was so cool because we had that farm pretty much to ourselves, aside from the owners. And I was able to take Syrup around and just give him a tour of this giant place. And he got a chance to meet all these farm animals. But what's cool about this place is they also had other animals too that aren't really native to California. But he was able to meet camels, donkeys, llamas, some horses. What else was he able to meet? Some ostriches. And it was the cutest thing because this aggressive dog, who is naturally aggressive towards almost everything because he's afraid, somehow the minute he saw a camel, excitement filled his body. He just like tugged me over there. We went over to the camel. He didn't bark. He wasn't aggressive. He was so curious. He was staring at this species that he had never seen before and probably never will. I don't know how many dogs get a chance to meet camels unless they live in areas where camels exist. He just was staring at this camel, and the camel came up to him. They started sniffing each other and they sort of started playing with each other a little bit. You know, the camel being behind the fence, Sarah being on the leash with me. And it wasn't like they were running back and forth, but they were definitely like call and response more or less, right? He would do something and the camel would then respond with something else. And it was just the cutest thing seeing the excitement in Syrup's eyes. No fear, just pure curiosity, pure understanding of this other thing that to him could have been an alien, right? Like, I mean, I don't know, but it was definitely one of my favorite memories, watching him meet these exotic creatures and watching him enjoy being around them. Which leads me to one of my last memories of him, which is I love the desert. I love going out to the desert. And I love hiking in the desert, doing all that sort of thing. So there's an area in California called Yucca Valley or Joshua Tree-ish area, very famous area. And we found an opportunity to take him out there with us. And this was the last trip that we took together. We rented a home out there, and for a whole week we were just out there enjoying the desert, just having so much fun. And it was this beautiful home with a big yard and a fence and everything, where we were able to let him loose. Just no rules for that vacation. We just took off the leash. He was safe in that environment, and we just said, "Go to town, buddy. Just like run around." And it was so cute watching him. He was already 9 years old by this point, but he had already lost a little bit of his energy. But once we let that leash go, he just took off, started sniffing everything. There was dogs across the street from another neighbor. And it was cute because those dogs would just bark at him, but he did not bark back. He was just having so much fun in this yard. He would like stare at them, maybe like smell, look at what they were doing, and then just go back to playing. And it was so cool because we call him vacation syrup, because he did sort of change his attitude when he went on vacation, when we took off the rules and ensured that he was safe, in a safe environment where he couldn't get hurt or nobody could hurt him or all that. He really took a life of his own. He became that happy dog that we know was inside, but through experiences out of his control, out of our control, he had to be defensive all the time. But watching him break out of his shell and just be a puppy, just be a dog, was amazing. I mean, he stargazed with us. He jumped on the bench with us to try and sit with us. There was a hammock there. He tried so hard to jump on the hammock with us. It was a little difficult for him. When I would paint outside, he hopped on the table and he would just watch me paint. And many times he just would slam his paw on the paint because I would move the brush and he'd try to copy the movement of the brush. It was beautiful watching him come alive. And that was Syrup, Cerberus. He was a little warrior. He was just a scamp. He was a dog who was afraid, and it was who had some unfortunate events, but who somehow found a way to live a very good life. And we loved him. Every second that I got a chance to be with Syrup, with Cerberus, I loved him. And I miss him. I miss him terribly. But I wanted to take time to just tell some of the best parts about having Cerberus, because I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in the world. I would do anything to have one more day with him, but I can't. We move on, we move forward. But it is fun and amazing remembering these moments because they were joyous. They were priceless. I know I'll have those moments again eventually when I'm ready, but it is just cool to know that I got a chance to love a dog and to have a buddy like Cerberus for as long as I was able to have, because he was worth it. He was priceless. He was unique. He was a German Shepherd. I love German Shepherds now because of Syrup. And it was just amazing every step of the way. And so I wanted just to tell his story, tell some fun stories about him. I might even do more of this. There's way more to tell about Syrup, but I just wanted to start somewhere, get some things down and let you know that, hey, I love dogs. I love pets. Here is a story of mine. And if you out there have some fun stories that you want to share, whether your pet is alive or not, I'd love to hear them. Send them over to me. I'd love to read them, maybe even put my own spin on them, just because we love our pets. We love animals, and they're a huge part of our lives. Their connection to us goes deeper than I'd like to admit, but it does. And if I can, I don't know, bring some joy into your day by telling you some fun pet stories, then hey, I think I've done my job. But anyways, yeah, I'm Eddie Barco. This has been the story of Cerberus, my German Shepherd, and I hope that you enjoyed.